And we're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. We will call to order today's regular council meeting of the Township of Cavan on this Monday, October 18th. I'd ask for approval of today's agenda. Moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes.
Councillor Moore.
Yes.
And Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. I'd ask that any members declare that pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof at this time, or if the situation arises. Seeing none, there is no closed session. So our first item, we will move into presentations. Item 6.1, Rika Law, RB Anderson Associates Limited, and Jamie Cook, Watson and Associates Economists, Growth Management Strategy and Master Servicing Study Update. I'm looking, are we just letting them in, Madam Clerk?
Mayor McFadden, yes, we are. Rika and Jamie are on their way in as we speak.
Welcome, Rika. I can see Rika.
Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome. I don't see Jamie. Or have I missed him?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Can you see me now?
There we
Yes.
go. Welcome,
Very
Jamie.
good. Hi, Jamie.
Thank you. Hey,
You made me
everybody.
catch my breath there. I wasn't going to do a presentation.
Welcome, both of you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I guess I'm going to start things off. So again, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to be able to present to you an update on the growth management strategy work. As you will recall, we finished the growth management strategy last year around May of 2020. And then since that time, we've been asked to update the study and for two primary reasons. And if I can go to the next slide, we'll just jump into the purpose of this update. I'm not seeing a full screen. I'm just wondering if it might just be me.
I'm seeing the partial as well. We've got the menu down the side. Can we get rid of the menu? Just hit that arrow to get rid of the side item for now while Jamie presents. No, or that. Yeah, that one. Yeah. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Full screen, but it's better.
Perfect. So to start off, as you will recall, or you'll be aware that the growth plan was updated in August of last year, and it was also amended. And that amendment essentially extended the forecast out for growth projections in that's outlined in Schedule 3 of the growth plan to a 2051 planning horizon. So all of the upper tier municipalities and single tier municipalities are now required to look out another 10 years, 2051, when they're looking at updates to their official plan reviews. These official plan reviews are to be conducted at the upper tier level or single tier level within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So right now, the County of Peterborough is going through their official plan review exercise, and that's essentially called a municipal comprehensive review. That work has to be completed by July of 2022 and approved by the minister at that point. So timelines are very tight to get that work updated. So as part of the growth management strategy that we're updating, we're now looking at a 2051 time horizon. So we've extended our horizon out another 10 years to look at the long-term population, housing, and employment projections for the township. The other key reason why we're updating this GMS is to also expand the scope to look at the area within the township known as the Special Study Area 1 lands, or the SSA 1 lands. These lands, you will know, they are identified in the township's official plan in Schedule A. It's a large area of land that's identified in the northeast section of the township, and it's been identified in Section 1.2.2 of the official plan as a special study area to be intended to look at future growth potential opportunity within that area over the official plan time horizon. So as part of those two items, we're updating this growth management strategy to look at this 2041 and 51 time period, as well as look more broadly at growth potential within the township, including the SSA 1 lands. So if we go to the next slide, this just gives you a bit of a background on the overall population forecast that's been set out in Schedule 3, as I mentioned, of the of the growth plan. The incremental growth that's been identified for the county of Peterborough is an additional 25,000 people from 2016 to 2051, an additional 10,000 jobs over that 2016 to 51 timeframe. So by 2051, the county is projected to reach a population of 82,000 people and about 26,000 jobs. And so relative to the previous work we did, looking at the 41 numbers, that's an additional 10,000 people and additional 6,000 people and additional 2,000 jobs above and beyond the previous 41 numbers. So that growth has to be rationalized. It has to be allocated at the lower tier level, which is a key component of what we're doing as part of the GMS work. I also just want to point out that there's a new policy within the growth plan that identifies that these forecasts are to be treated as minimums. And that's a different policy requirement that relative to what's been previously in place in the growth plan. Previously, the growth forecast was essentially treated as a cap for growth, so a number that you could not exceed. It's now being treated as the minimum, so it's now the floor for growth that has to be achieved for each of the upper tiers and signal tiers across GGH. And so there's a role for all of the local municipalities in the county to accommodate that growth. And as we know, Cavan Monaghan's role is quite significant within the county. Next slide. So I just wanted to point out some of what I'm calling the drivers and disruptors of growth over the long term within the county, within the township. This first slide just shows the trends that we've been seeing with respect to long-term population growth within the Greater Golden Horseshoe, within on the left, the GTHA, so the Greater Toronto Area and Hamilton, and on the right, the Outer Ring. And I guess to add to the complexity, the growth plan is not the only forecast that's produced by the province. There's also a set of projections that are prepared by the Ministry of Finance. So they also provide long-term growth projections for primarily the purposes of long-term capital planning, infrastructure planning, while the growth plan is really more of a broader policy document for land use planning and also to support infrastructure as well. The primary highlight I want to show here is that when we look at the Ministry of Finance numbers over time, looking at the 2017 compared to the 2020 numbers, the province is showing slower growth for the GTHA and higher growth for the Outer Ring. And so what they're basically saying is that the outward growth pressure that we've been experiencing from the GTHA into the Outer Ring is accelerating, and they're seeing more outward growth pressure over time. And so they're seeing higher growth in the Outer Ring. And as we know, this has been accelerated, as we can see through the recent activity that's been happening with respect to building permits, for example, in the township of Cavan. COVID has accelerated this trend over the last year and a half. And so it's one of the key drivers why we're expecting to see stronger growth in the Outer Ring, including Peterborough County. And again, it's really driven by two primary factors related to COVID. But I want to be clear that these trends were already in play prior to COVID. By around 2015, we were already starting to see quite an increase in the growth rates in the Outer Ring municipalities as the economy was recovering from the 2008-2009 economic downturn. Stronger immigration within the GTHA was also putting overall higher levels of growth in this region, replacing higher levels of growth in this region. And then COVID is essentially adding more sort of fuel to the fire, so to speak, on that outward growth pressure. The primary driver has been declining housing affordability within the GTA, as well as a broadening economy and economic recovery across the GTA, including the Outer Ring. So there's more job opportunities within the what I would call the commuter shed within the Cavan Monaghan area. And we also have added on top of that more opportunities for remote work or hybrid work models as a result of COVID, which is also further accelerating demand for housing within the Outer Ring, including Cavan Monaghan. So just wanted to provide that sort of opening discussion to help set the stage on the long-term projections for the township and the county. The next slide talks a little bit about a similar trend that's been happening on the labor force side of things. And so this slide here provides a historical projection of labor force, or an historical account of labor force activity over the last 20 years. And you can generally see that In the dark blue, the labor force has been growing relatively steady within the Peterborough CMA. You can see the dip we had from 2008 and 9 as a result of the economic downturn, higher rates of unemployment that occurred during that time. And then you can see that steady recovery that we experienced since 2008 up until about 2019. And then COVID hit in 2020. And then we move into the quarterly results here in light blue off to the right of this slide. And you can see, just want to point out the downward impacts that COVID has had on labor force, but the recovery that we've experienced since about June of 2020. You can see unemployment rates peaked around January of 2021 and have sharply come down in the first 2 quarters of this year. And you can see we are showing signs of strong recovery. We're now at a challenge, though, that we're recovering at a rapid pace, and we're starting to experience lower levels of unemployment. And now we're in experiencing issues of labor shortages, which also then directly ties to housing opportunities as well. So in order to attract new labor to the county and to the township, we need to have housing opportunities to accommodate young members and new members of the labor force. And so this is an ongoing theme as well that I'll be talking about when we deal with the results of the GMS update. So just wanted to give you that sort of overall sort of picture of what's been happening and what the state of the regional economy before I move into local issues. So on the next slide, you can see how some of this demand that I've been discussing has been sort of manifested into recent building permit activity within the township of Cavan. This looks at annual building permit activity for new housing over the last decade. You can see between 2011 and 2017, we're averaging a fairly moderate or modest level of actual residential building permit activity, around 22 residential units a year. Since 2018, that's increased by about 6 times to an average of about 130 residential building permits a year. And we do expect to see that level of growth continuing at a similar pace over the long-term forecast period to 2051. On the next slide, also just want to point out, building on this issue of the regional trends that I discussed, the employment growth potential within the surrounding commuter shed. And we looked at this slide in the past and in the 2020 GMS, and just wanted to provide an update now to the 51 period. And what this is showing is the commuter shed within Cavan. For the purpose of this work, we've merged the county and the city into one large commuter shed area based on the data that's provided. But what I wanted to show here is that when you look at that surrounding commuter shed, where about 95% of the individuals who live and are employed within Cavan and commute out for work, the majority are traveling in this commuter shed here that we've identified. The overall employment potential in the commuter shed has been identified at about 1.1 million additional jobs from 2016 to 2051. Now, I will note that the forecasts are rather ambitious that have been set out by the province, but when we look at the amount of growth that's been identified in places like Durham Region, for example, which represents a significant portion of the commuter shed, it's been identified as the fastest growing economy within all of the Greater Toronto area. So just want to point out some of that broader opportunity within the commuter shed, as well as the more local opportunities that are emerging within the township as well for jobs, which I'll get into a little later in the presentation. So if we can move to the next slide, what I want to now do is just provide a bit of an overview of the long-term projections. We've extended the forecast out to 2051, so we're here today to talk to you a bit about those projections. So on the first slide, this shows the long-term projection for 2051. We've reviewed those projections on an incremental basis. We've determined that the 2041 numbers that we identified in the GMS are still appropriate for long-term projection purposes at 15,500. And then we're projecting an additional 3,300 additional people by 2051. That's a growth rate of about just under 2% a year, it's 1.9%. So when we compare that with the county's projections overall that are stated in the growth plan. We're growing at a rate of almost double the overall countywide rate of growth. That's the projection for long-term growth. Also just wanted to point out, as you already know from the work from the 2020 GMS, we are projecting to see higher growth by 2031 relative to what was identified is currently identified in the official plan, where about 1,300 additional people at that 31 planning horizon. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see the amount of housing that's required to accommodate that forecast. You can see on average, we're projecting an annual amount of housing activity of about 124 units a year. So as you recall, I mentioned in the last couple of years, we've been averaging about 130 permits a year for new units. So we're projecting a fairly comparable amount of new development activity for occupied housing over the forecast period. Again, significantly higher than what was projected, or sorry, what's occurred between 2001 and 2016. I also wanted to point out, and again, this is not a new story, but just an extension of what we've been doing from the 2020 GMS, that the nature of housing is diversifying. We're expecting to see a broader range of housing types by structure type or density. So you can see here the dark blue represents low density housing, and while we still expect to see a large amount of housing development within that low density category of single and semi-detached units, we do expect to see a greater share of medium density housing over time, and also high density housing. And that's going to be accommodated within the urban area of Millbrook. The major driver of that shift is really twofold. One, the demographic impacts of an aging population and the needs for a broader range of housing to accommodate that aging population, as well as a broader range of ownership and rental housing opportunities to accommodate younger members of the population age groups, primarily those younger individuals that are coming for work and or to commute, as well as declining housing affordability. So not everyone will be able to afford to own a single detached unit, and other options will need to be provided for other affordable forms of housing. The next slide points out the current policy target with respect to intensification. So intensification is essentially defined as the amount of growth that's being accommodated within the built-up area of Millbrook over the 2022 to 51 time period. The current official plan policy identifies a target of 20% intensification. When we assess this as part of the 2020 GMS, we recommended reducing that target to 15% based on available supply opportunities and demand for intensification. This will be something we'll have to look at further as part of this update. Going now beyond 2041 to 2051 horizon, the task at hand will be determined whether we feel we can achieve something a little higher than 15% going forward, and whether a 20% target is reasonable. I wanted to point out that the current minimum target that's set out in the growth plan for Peterborough County is a 40% intensification target. And because Millbrook is one of the key urban settlement areas within the county, it puts quite a bit of pressure on Millbrook to accommodate a higher amount of intensification than even 40%. And so there's going to be some policy friction, I would call it, between what we feel is reasonable that can be accommodated as a percentage, and ultimately what is going to be allocated through the work that Peterborough County is doing, and ultimately through the work that the local GMS is going to identify. Moving on to the employment forecast. This is a fairly high-level summary of the employment projections to 2051. So moving beyond the 2041 period, we've identified an additional about 900 jobs over that time period. So just under 1,000 additional jobs to the township. That's an overall increase of about 3,300 jobs that have been identified over that 2021 to 41 period, or sorry, 51 period. As I mentioned in the GMS work, the overall target sectors that have been identified in more export-based sectors include agribusiness and food processing, clean technology, transportation, warehousing, and wholesale trade, as well as advanced manufacturing. Now, we'd also expect to see other retail and population-related employment as well associated with population growth, including additional work-at-home employment that would be included in that overall forecast. Now, you may be wondering what the green line is representing. That is the employment activity rate. And so that is the measure of employment to population. So it's a ratio. Overall, the ratio of jobs to population has been increasing quite steadily since 2001. You can see it's gone from about 29% to about 42% in 2021. And that's a really important policy or a really important statistic to support the policy objective that's not only set out in the growth plan, but in the county and local documents to encourage more complete communities that are balanced between population and jobs. It's a key goal for the county and the township to provide more local opportunities for employment. We would expect, though, to see that employment activity rate to stabilize over time. It's quite, I've mentioned before, it's quite challenging to see an employment activity rate steadily increasing over the long term in the face of an aging population and an aging labor force. So we do expect to see that activity rate to stabilize around that 47-48% level over the long term. On the last slide, I just want to show you the overall share of growth between the township and the county. And so this is an important metric to look at because we want to understand, well, what's the fit for growth within the township relative to the county overall. And so there's only so much growth that's been identified in the county. And as I'll mention later at the end of this presentation, we are expecting to see the results of the countywide work that's being reported to council on October the 29th at County Council. So we'll get a sense of ultimately what level of growth they're projecting and whether they're looking to achieve something higher than the minimum or the minimums. We would expect in most cases the projections are targeting toward the minimum forecast, recognizing that these minimums are generally aspirational targets and would be difficult to exceed. If you look at the overall share of growth that the township has been allocated in our updated work, it's about 40% of the overall county-wide population, and that's an increase relative to historical trends from about a third to 40%. So we're expecting to see a larger share of growth being accommodated within the township of Cavan-Monaghan over time. With respect to the employment forecast, we're projecting a share of about 52% of the overall employment would be allocated to the township. These are fairly similar shares of growth that we had previously identified in the 2020 GMS work to 2041. So I'm now going to turn it over to Rika, who's going to provide us an update on where things are at with the master servicing analysis, and then we'll conclude with comments and questions.
Great. Thank you for that, Jamie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Actually,
Yeah.
Rika, if you don't mind, I was just actually going to flip it back because it is distinct sections. I know they're related, but I was going to open it up because there's some real key items here that I don't want lost once we get into the second part of the presentation. So I'll give councillors an opportunity first to ask questions of Jamie on this first part. I know he was trying to pass it over to you and sort of sneak under there, but Jamie, we're gonna turn it over to you now. Questions from members of council specifically to Jamie's presentation before Rika starts. Go ahead, Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Jamie. I guess my question is around slide 10, which is the housing forecast. Now, if we know that we're going to be kind of, the employment's increasing and, we have to hit densifications and the housing market's, really screaming right now for first-time home buyers and immigrants and, all that. But everybody who can't afford the single unit dwellings, but yet the single unit dwellings is the obviously the dominant feature in that 2021 to 2026 column. Like, wouldn't more intensification and more dense housing be the key at that point to accommodate that growth?
It's a great question through you, Mr. Mayor. We are identifying that shift to be occurring. We have not gone back and adjusted our mix of housing that was prepared as part of the 2020 projections. I guess the key, one of the key things to look at is, what is the share and what is the structure type of development within the development approvals process now that we're currently working through. And we feel that the mix of housing that we've identified over the next 10 to 15 years closely reflects the kind of development that the township is reviewing and processing with respect to active applications. So we would expect to see that shift occurring over time, as you're mentioning, but we wouldn't expect to see that happening overnight necessarily, or we wouldn't expect to see a stark shift in the first 5 to 10 years, but more in that latter part of the forecast period. It's also important to recognize that the mix is going to be influenced by new people who are coming to the township as well as those who are already here, and so there's a large percentage of existing residents, particularly in that baby boom category, that are going to age in place. But some of them are going to ultimately look for different forms of housing over the longer term. We think they're going to want to age in their community, but they're going to want choice of housing by different forms of housing, whether that's high density condos, rental opportunities, seniors housing, housing that would offer potential long-term care, for example. That's going to, we think, be a rather gradual process, and that's why we've assumed this to be a gradual shift, not a stark shift.
But through you, Mayor, to follow up then, but is that the right approach? I mean, if we know that the boomers are going to be looking for different housing and giving up the housing they have, and I mean, they're not going to be looking for, or they're not going to be selling it cheap, put it that way. So, I mean, you're still going to run into a problem where you don't have affordable housing for those people that are, trying to move to the area and trying to get, to fill these employment jobs. Like if they can't afford to live here, they can't afford to work here.
It's something we can talk about if we feel there's an interest to be a little more aggressive at this shift. I do a lot of work, obviously, in this area. I'm working all across many municipalities in the GTA and the Outer Ring, looking at this very issue. There's a lot of pressure to continue to provide the grade-related housing forms, but I don't disagree with you that I feel there's going to be a steady need for a broader variety of housing. And so if we feel that this mix needs to be shifted a bit further, it's something we can look into. I would say that I would expect this shift in the mix to be more, again, more of an aggressive shift in places like York Region, where housing affordability is really out of reach for most, even middle-income housing households. Whereas in the township here and in Peterborough, housing affordability is still relatively, you're in a better position relative to most of the GTA municipalities that we would look at. So there's still an opportunity here that's driving the need for low density. It's one of the key reasons why you were seeing the higher growth, because you're seeing that outward pressure for people to in search for grade-related housing that they can afford that they couldn't normally afford within the GTA. So it's a balance at the end of the day, and I'm a strong advocate for this shift. And if there's a desire to push a little bit further, I'm open to that.
So one more follow-up, sorry, Mayor. I guess if there is a desire for that, how do we push? Like, what is the push? Is it in these charts? Is it in the official plan? Like, where does that push take place?
I think it starts with the work that we're doing as part of the update. As I mentioned, a key metric that the township is going to be looking at is their intensification target. So the current target at 40% is very aggressive. I would suggest that it's not obtainable to achieve a 40% or higher intensification target within the township. But the current target that we identified in the GMS at 15% may be something that we can push a little bit stronger, particularly in the post-41 period to get us up to a higher percentage of intensification. Because when we're looking at these forms of medium and high density housing, most of those opportunities are going to occur within the built-up area of Millbrook. So there's a direct relationship between that intensification target and what we're looking to achieve in terms of a mix of housing. So it starts here, I think, with the metrics, and then it really works into policy from there in coordination with the county.
So final question, part two, Mayor. Sorry. So does this chart here represent us hitting the 15% target, the 20% target, and obviously not the 40% target? So what does this chart show us hitting?
We haven't quite, through you, Mr. Mayor, we haven't quite nailed down that intensification target as of yet. But I would say that I would feel quite strongly that going up to 51, a 20% intensification target would be an appropriate minimum to be looking at this point. But if we were to go with something higher than what's in this mix here, then you may be looking at something slightly higher than 20%. But when you look at the actual market conditions within the township and particularly within the Millbrook built-up area, I don't think going much higher than 20% is likely achievable from a market perspective. So then it just becomes how far do you want to push that policy away from what you think is a reasonable market projection. And I feel there's a friction there again. There's a that you're looking to push that, but there are also, it's important to keep in mind, there are specific policies in the growth plan and in the land use assessment methodology guidelines that identify you do have to look at market demand as well. So that's a key aspect of looking at mix.
Very good. Further questions, Deputy Mayor Graham?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. My question is actually for Director Connolly. With regards to these sorts of numbers, and it's kind of an extension of Councillor Huntley's comments, especially when it comes to like the short-term numbers, like the 2026, is there ever a sort of rectification or an overlay of the projection versus what the applications are that we have received on that shorter term horizon, and to see where we're at with regards to these different categories? Because I agree with Councillor Huntley that there are a diversity of needs, and I think the term complete communities is really bantered around to sort of justify a certain number of variable components or various size structures or dwellings. But if it's going to be complete in the true sense of the word, it actually needs to address the local demand rather than the larger market forces that I think throughout this portion of the discussion anyways, we talk about the local solution, but then we use it with affordability from, a more macro or provincial level. Well, that is not the local affordable stature. And, you see the constant, or at least I see in my news feed regularly, the tremendous, I want to say it's close to $250,000 increase in the average home in Peterborough since this term of council started. So we're talking about affordability on a macro level rather than a local level, but we're then talking about, having this different sort of a local sort of composition of development. So I wondered if Mr. Connolly could speak to sort of what, or if there's the opportunity for him to sort of discuss what we have in the short-term horizon and where we're sort of on the short track to these sorts of variable levels of density in our housing developments.
So through your worship to Councillor Deputy Mayor Graham, I should say, yes, what we try and do with any of the applications that come forward, we look within the planning justification report in conformity with our official plan. Our official plan has ratios that we want to be able to fulfill. On top of that, we look at the county official plan as they are the approval authority for any plans of subdivision as well as any official plan amendments. So all of those are measured against existing targets, existing policy with respect to number of jobs, number of houses per in terms of number of population as well as jobs as well. We look at those densities. We do look at the idea of a range of choice. Affordability is an issue that in my 30 plus years of experience is something that goes in cycles. So when I was at Durham, part of the issue there was making room for the middle, the idea of being able to provide a housing opportunity or that type of housing stock that will allow going from the first in buyers to what were at the time, and this would be 2018 most recently, of what was going out of sight. And even then, it's even going more so. So the idea is that through the work that Jamie and company are doing is to try and look at how do we look at these peaks and valleys, but how do we sort of lay that out? The idea of what we provide in terms of opportunities locally is the idea of providing a variety of choice of housing. And that would be through the mix of high density, medium density, as well as the ground related development. But yeah, we do look at that, and again, look at suitability for that. And that's why this work, our official plan only goes to 2031. The idea of the work that was adopted by council to 2041 last year, now looking at that extra 10 years, that 30-year time horizon, is to take a look at how can we do that. And to your point, Deputy Mayor, talk about a complete community and be able to do that. That also looks at some of the affordability and housing options, like purpose-built rental as a mixture, just freehold, that type of thing. I hope that gets towards what you're asking me.
Yeah, and I'll just refine it maybe a bit more, Mr. Conley. It is just that when we're reviewing sort of plans of subdivision, and when they finally come before council, can there maybe be a component of those discussions that sort of specifically outline their contribution to this sort of projection, right? Like if we're seeing these, there's a number of units, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's 500 units, right? Like we talk about, the different compositions, the sizes, the structures, the frontage, all that sort of thing. But we don't talk about the diversity or the composition in regards to the pursuit of these sorts of targets. And where, like, for instance, when we're talking about Tower Hill North, there's some larger dense structures in there, and there's going to be far more units than we probably would have historically been creating. So we'll probably be way further ahead in that percentage of higher density due to those sorts of structures than maybe even the 11% is captured. But I don't know. But I think it would be helpful at those points, or that point of consideration, to understand exactly sort of where this fits in this plan, because from my limited involvement with the housing discussions at the county, there seems to be this lack of, there's these plans and all these great ideas or these sort of macro level things, but there's very little granular application or monitoring as to, what is actually being produced and what is actually being pursued in regards to the, objectives. So that's sort of where I'm looking at, is if we can put that local lens on how we are in relation to these sorts of targets and forecasts, so that we can ensure that council is aware of making those sorts of decisions, to understand that we're doing them to provide that complete community to the true definition of the word.
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor Graham, yes, indeed, we try and do that through not only our analysis and the planning justification rationale that the proponent provides, but also with the idea of what are those opportunities. We also maybe even taking, for example, Tower Hill North, where there are 3 blocks which are considered higher density, and not just the typical 3-story, but also the 4-story, which would push that density up. We've also, from a township perspective, asked that be achieved sooner than later in the phasing plan.
Right.
The reason being that a lot of the times, and certainly in my experience close to the GTA, is you get promised that higher density, and then it gets the end, and sometimes the excuse will be that, well, that the market just doesn't demand that type of high density. I think for us as a township that's providing, consistent with what you're saying, we're looking for those densities to be achieved earlier, not only on that macro level, but on a neighborhood by neighborhood specific basis as well. But definitely we can emphasize that even more so when we bring things forward to council in the future.
Very good. Just a question along those same lines. Bill 108, I believe that more homes, more choices, had specific sections in there relative to inclusionary zoning as it related to affordable housing, and the requirement for a developer to effectively have a portion of the development to be specifically affordable. Is that an exercise or a tool that we would use in the official plan, or is it something that we'd have to make reference to in the official plan and follow through in our zoning? Because it made reference to a development permitting system, which we would have to implement. And again, I don't want to miss the opportunity and leave it too long. Is that something that we need to have the discussion when we're going through the OP at the county, or is that a later discussion?
Through your worship to council, it's the type of thing that we would like to see. With the increasing of, I'm old enough to know that when there used to be a special provincial policy statement on affordable housing, it was 25%. This is a long time ago. With the advent of Bill 108 and the idea of implementing, we would want to have that in the official plan and then have zoning. We do ask in any of the development, certainly that in my time being with the township, we look at how there's opportunity to provide affordable housing. And that's not just affordable housing from the standpoint of can our kids afford a house or buy a house, but also from the standpoint of looking at social services and with respect to how we would define not spending more than 30% of your income on affordable housing. So again, the tool is there. I think we need to do it. What the province didn't do wasn't prescriptive in saying what that density target should be. That's open to flexibility. But I would say through our discussions here, through the work with the county official plan as well, and as we bring it down to local context, we should look at making sure that it's there, not just something that is discretionary. And I think that's the kind of thing that we'd like to implement. And again, even with Tower Hill North, our discussions were in those discussions, we're looking at affordable housing and what kind of opportunities there were there. I think we need more teeth in our policy, and that would start with the OP as well as our zoning to do that. So I would support that.
Okay, so with that in mind, how is it best to park that idea so that it's not forgotten at that discussion with the OP? Do you want a motion of council? Have you taken it, you've got that parked away? I don't want it overlooked because the OP is such a large document. There's so many facets to it. It's just yet another item that clearly is of importance to council. How best do you wish to proceed on that?
Through your worship to council, I think if you put it in a motion, it's something that we're held to, and it's something that will keep us as a reminder. It's something that is top of mind for myself, but again, I would like to be able to be held to account, have a target, and then be able to report back to council in the future on that. So if it's specific to a motion, either at the end of the presentation or something, I would certainly support that.
Very good. Okay, so we'll put our minds together, and once we've received the presentation and done everything here, we'll do it at the end, as long as council is good with that. We'll do a motion relative to dealing with the affordable housing issue. Any other questions relative to the first presentation from Mr. Cook? Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, I want to shift gears a little bit to the slide 13, I guess. Maybe Mr. Cook could help me understand a little bit more on this one. And it's, if we look at the incremental growth, what I'm seeing here is the entire county of Peterborough grew by 600 people, like population grew by 600, but our township itself grew by 200. So was there an 800 population growth, or are they independent of each other? I'm just trying to understand how that number works, because that feeds into the next number below for the employment, which looks like there were 900 jobs created in the county. And of those 900, 1,000 of those jobs were created in this township. Like, I don't understand how, if we grow by 200 people, we can grow by 1,000 jobs.
Yeah, it's a good question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important to recognize that the print is a little small on that. It's a 2001 to 2016 period. So this was a somewhat unique time period. We had a pretty big economic downturn in 2008-9. So we had relatively slow population growth. We also have an aging population. So, we're seeing lower average PPUs. We're seeing net loss in the existing population as the older population essentially is dying off over the forecast period. So I can't quite. I'd have to take a look to see exactly what was going on, but it was it definitely was a relatively moderate period for growth. Things really, as I mentioned, turned a corner in 2015. You can see that almost everywhere in the GTA and Outer Ring, and we've been on a different trajectory since that time. So that kind of explains the population projections, the employment projections. So employment is not necessarily going to be directly tied to what's happening with the local population. So the local population is going to put pressure on the need for population-related services like retail and local commercial services, institutional. But the other export-based sectors that are occurring within the township and the county are going to be more broadly driven by regional factors like regional infrastructure, the competitiveness of the sites that are available for industrial development, the overall economic climate. We also had a downturn clearly on the employment side of things, but over that time period, the county and the township did experience quite a bit of growth. I think particularly in that later part of the 2001 to 16 period. So it is possible to have a situation where you can have more employment growth than you can have population. that is something that can definitely happen, and this is what the Statistics Canada data is reporting for the township and the county.
So, follow-up
Oh,
question.
sorry, go ahead.
So we had 5 times the employment growth and population growth. So I mean, a lot of people are commuting to our township now.
That's what the results of the 2001 to 16 data is showing. That's Stats Can actual data. That's something that I can necessarily dispute. I think
doesn't that then go and contradict your slide 7, which is saying that everybody here goes somewhere else to work?
Well, again, it's an historical snapshot in time. It's not exactly I think it's a unique period. It's somewhat of an anomaly in some ways in terms of the trends that we saw, particularly in that 11 to 16 period. I don't think it goes in contradiction to what I'm saying. We are over the long-term period, we're projecting more of a diversification within the regional economy. We'd expect to see more live-work opportunities, more balanced growth, with not only with a broadening regional economy, but now with the extension of the 407 and Highway 35-115 up to the township. There's more opportunity to attract development locally within the township on your employment lands. So there's a lot of factors I think that are driving I think a more balanced relationship with respect to commuting. I wouldn't necessarily get fixated only on this historical period. But if you want, I can try to provide you a bit more detail to try to dissect this a bit. But I would suggest that you're going to continue to see, out commuting, and the location of the township to that employment market that I mentioned, apparently in the East GTA, provides a solid sort of location for the majority of those who are commuting to work within a 45-minute drive. But there's also these additional drivers at play where you're going to see more hybrid options for work, more remote work. So we think that overall the commuting will likely moderate, and we'll see a greater live-work share over the longer-term period.
Deputy Mayor Graham, I saw your hand.
Just a clarity. I'm trying to think of. I'm having an issue with the incremental growth numbers, and I'm trying not to get bogged down on it, Jamie, like you said. And I'm assuming that there could be circumstances where employment opportunities in other townships in the county actually went down. So that could be the circumstance by which our number is higher. But if that is correct, which it sounds like you just affirmed it was, that would mean that there was 1,100 losses. The rest of the county's losses were 1,100 in comparison when you remove ours from that total, which seems like that's significant. That's where I'm just trying to I being one of the 2 representatives on county council, I know it's not, we're very much focused and doing all the things we can to try to strategize this to address, employment growth. But I don't think I've ever seen matrices or a presentation that suggested that there was, that substantial a reduction in employment in the county, in other areas of the county in comparison to ours, because I think I would have noticed. But maybe I'm just looking for a little clarity on that number as to, if that's the case, that's a huge problem. And I just find it hard to believe.
I think if you look at it, I'm going through it too on the fly as well. So correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but I believe you'd only be down 100, Matthew, or Deputy Mayor, because it's 15,900 minus 1,000 would put you at 14,900, which is down 100. So over that period, basically you've lost 100 jobs. And I guess if I could speak to the population part, I do recall that the county got into somewhat of a predicament trying to handle growth allocations based on previous, because our net population actually decreased during a census period in there for the county, which sort of messed things up. So I'm not really surprised on that. But as far as the employment, that it's down minus 100.
Yeah, just
If there was no other growth in any of the counties, yes. But there has to be some. And that's where I'm at if you added ours in, that we've lost 1,100 in the county for our 1,000 to make that 900, right? I'm kind of doing it backwards the way that you did it, Scott. Like, if there's 1,000 in Cavan-Monaghan and there's only 900 in the whole county, that means you're right. That means there's been 100, they've lost all of that. And there's no growth employment-wise in the entire county.
I think, sorry, if I could just
Go ahead, Jim.
speak into this, Mr. Mayor. I think you kind of hit it, Mr. Mayor, on we're looking at net growth. So obviously there's going to be housing activity that's occurring. There's going to be population, new people moving in, but there's a net issue on both population and employment. So when you look at let's talk about the employment for a second. When you look at the net employment growth, when you look at the within that 01 to 16 period, 2003 to 2010, if you look at the more macro trends, we had a sharp decline in the amount of manufacturing jobs that were in the net loss of manufacturing jobs in the broader regional economy within the GTA and the province as a whole. We had other major job losses that occurred over that 2001, the time period, as a result of that downturn. So we had expansions happening, we had new jobs being created, we had net losses, but ultimately, you're looking at a major base of employment within the county that was shedding jobs during that period because of the impacts of the downturn. And that recovery wasn't really fully realized until after the census data was collected and the employment data in 2016. We were just starting to see that recovery really taking hold around, as I said, around 2015. So a lot of these places didn't have occupied establishments when the census was being conducted. So there's some funny things that happen when you have major downturns in terms of how it gets reported. Same thing happens on the population. If you think about some of the more smaller communities within the county that you would drive by in hamlets and even in Millbrook itself, where you see regular activity happening with new construction, but the actual population is not growing because you have an aging population, you have declining persons per unit, so you can get situations where you have very flat population growth, even in the face of fairly steady housing activity, which is a key policy that we want to be looking at here in the GMS as well, because we want to make sure that all of our hamlets and our urban community of Millbrook is growing and complete, and we want to see vibrancy in these areas. So you're raising a good point that, that's helping me to just maybe articulate a little bit of what goes on when you look at the demographic trends over time. Hopefully that helps a bit.
You've done a wonderful job, Jamie, trying to explain the census information. I'm glad I don't have your job, because it's very complex. I'm just trying to think of Cavan-Monaghan during the period of 2001 to 2016, and I can think of the significant amount of growth that's occurred at the airport between Seneca College and the Flying Colors. But then also in that time frame, I believe we lost the prison, or was pretty close to that. The Millbrook Penitentiary would have been near the beginning, I believe. And also the downturn in harness racing at Kawartha Downs, the loss of jobs there. So, that's just our own municipality, how the big influx, some came in, some came out. So I'm sure we're overlooking some major employers in and out of the rest of the county. So I guess the census numbers are what they are. That's the numbers that came back, but that's a full job in itself, just trying to analyze those.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on this first part? I know I've got questions relative to slide number 11, if we want to bring up, page number 11. Page 14, slide 11. It's the one with the circles.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's a larger discussion to be had here, and I want to make sure I understand it. So when we're talking about intensification, knowing Millbrook, where exactly do you mean? Do you mean in the downtown core? Do you mean any of the new subdivisions and on our way out? What is intensification?
So it's a great question, Mr. Mayor. So intensification, it's a definition. So it has two meanings, and I don't mean to overly complicate this, but The PPS identifies intensification, as does the growth plan, as areas of infill, redevelopment, and higher utilization of existing properties. But on top of that, the growth plan also identifies intensification as the area that was built as of 2006. So back in 2006, the province drew a line around the built up area of Millbrook, and they said this is the area that is built as of 2006. And for the purposes of monitoring growth within the built up area, we're going to call that the built boundary. And that's the area where we're going to identify anything in that area is going to be defined as intensification. And they deliberately held that line constant so that they can monitor growth within that built up area over time. So as of 2021, that line that's been identified as the delineated built up area in Millbrook is the same line. And it's identified in your official plan. Again, we'd have to go to the OP schedule to look at it, but it's the area that was built as of 06. So that's what we mean by intensification.
Okay, very good. So that would be, and I'm just ballparking, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I believe that would be the Brookside subdivision and sort of the existing built up each side of the hill, but it obviously would not include any of the lands for the Highlands. And okay, so now that we've established what the intensification, what that area is, and it would be anything that's within that area. Am I correct in my understanding then, if we've got 1,000 units that we're going to put, let's just say in Millbrook in general, so there's going to be new development versus intensification. If you want 1,000 units, 600 could go to a brand new subdivision that's outside of that intensification marker, but 400 would have to go inside that. So in other words, to hit your 40%. And so you see a new subdivision come online in the next OP that has it's brand new, just identified. For that 600, that's going to translate to 400 is basically going into our downtown infilling, besides a couple lots here and there, because we've got so much natural core, natural heritage areas that we won't be touching that. But basically that intensification is going to be in our downtown, the majority of it. I mean, outside of maybe the fairgrounds, we don't really have any large areas of that. We've got the potential of the prison property. But outside of that, we don't really have anywhere else to stick 400 people. And that's only if you're putting a 600 unit subdivision, which we've seen, and we'll get to, Rika, sorry, we're coming to you. We're going to see there's lots of other growth going outside. So we have got to keep in mind that what the province is asking for here is 40% of these numbers are going into that area. And Jamie, I think you spoke to this earlier. That's just looking at it from a municipal perspective, but from a county perspective, I believe we're only one of 4 municipalities that have an urban center. I think it's Norwood, Havelock, ourselves, and Lakefield that would qualify. So therefore, when you're doing severances or other types of development in those other 4 municipalities, because we know their growth is not going to be zero, it's going to fall upon the remaining 4 municipalities to take in that intensification in our downtown. So as if 40% wasn't bad enough, because we can picture realistically what that's going to look like. It's actually going to be higher than 40% because we're going to take the brunt of the intensification from all the municipalities that can. And I can't emphasize it enough. This isn't good. This is not realistic, and this is another example of why we should not be in this Greater Golden Horseshoe plan, because quite frankly, I don't know how high they want to go with the buildings in Millbrook, but 3 stories is pretty much our limit at this point without ladder trucks and the infrastructure to support it. So, Jamie, what's your suggestion how we're going to move forward? I think it warrants more than just a letter saying we don't want to do this. Quite frankly, we can't do it, and I'd love to understand that where their rationale is, how we would possibly do it given our situation.
Wow, that's a great question. You've nailed it, Mr. Mayor. And so to build on your comment, I think so. There's a balance here, obviously. Councillor Huntley has pointed out the need for more of a broader range of housing by type, and I've agreed that that is also a need. Most of that need is going to be required to be accommodated in the built-up area where you have access to amenities and community infrastructure. But to your point, there's a limit to how much intensification is reasonable from a market perspective as well from a municipal servicing perspective. And what you really nailed is that it's not really 40%, it's something much higher because it's 40% of all housing, including rural housing or housing going to what we would call urban areas that don't actually have delineated built up areas in the rest of the county, as you pointed out. So I think the approach here is to provide the insight locally in terms of what we think is a reasonable target, from a market perspective, also looking at the broader policies of where we're trying to go. Because you have to keep in mind that, and I get into debate sometimes with others on this, that we're not just looking at market trends for housing today. We're trying to project the market for the next 30 years. So where is the market headed? Nobody really knows, but we know that it's going to continue to shift towards this broader range of housing. I can't see a scenario where affordability is going to likely improve, over the next 30 years.
I think it's going to shift to tents if we keep this up because people can't afford anything.
Fair enough, Mr. Mayor. So I think the approach is to provide a realistic and measured, target that's based on, local analysis. I also do want to point out to you and the rest of council that it's very likely that county itself will take a look at this target and suggest an alternative because it is very high, and the province does allow for an alternative target to be recommended, and that may be something that ultimately we'll see from the county. We can't say for sure what's going to come out of the county's work on the 29th, but that's a very likely outcome that we'll see. But we still have to work with an alternative, and what that, if the alternative is 30% or 25%, that still means a big number that we have to be comfortable with within Millbrook.
Mm-hmm. And I think the really important part here is it's provincial, it's legislatively being pushed upon us from the province that we must comply with this, and we have to be very careful because even putting unrealistic items within our official plan, i.e. doing 10-story apartments in the downtown core, if it's in there, ultimately a developer can take us to task with an LPAT. Next thing you know, you're going to have a 10-story apartment in the downtown in order to meet an unrealistic goal. So we have to be careful in how we're going to plan for it and be realistic at the same time. So it's definitely quite a conundrum that we're facing. So thank you very much. That's a very difficult slide. For 2 circles on a page, it actually says a lot, and there's a lot of concerns with those 2 circles. So thank you for bringing that forward. Any other questions with regards to the first part of the presentation? We're going to get over to Rika's second part on the Millbrook Master Servicing. You ready?
Sure. So thank you for that, Jamie. I hear an echo. Do you also hear an echo? No? Okay. So thank you, Jamie, for that background information. And thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and members of council for your attention. We'll be moving into presenting the Millbrook Master Servicing Plan up to 2041. So this is not for all of Cavan Monaghan. It is only for the Millbrook area.
Are you still getting an echo?
No, it's better.
It's better. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. So this is to consider how the facilities need to get upgraded in order to accommodate the short term, which we call 2026, and long-term growth, which we call up to 2041 in Millbrook. Just to let you know, Watson and RV Anderson have been working together with township staff in order to coordinate the growth management study as well as the master servicing plan. We've been working off the same set of data so that we can have a unified message coming to council. And this is work in progress. So we will hope to provide council with more details and an update later as we get further into the master servicing plan. So thank you for going to the slide. So the outline of the presentation is going to talk about existing conditions of the facilities as of 2019, just to echo the timeline that is used as a baseline from Watson's study. We are also going to talk about what are the servicing needs in order to get to the short-term growth of 2026, and then the long-term growth needs to get to 2041, and then what growth beyond 2041 would mean, and that will circle back to Watson for that explanation, and then we will follow up with questions and comments. Please also note that this presentation is intended to give you an understanding as to what can happen, along with the considerations and limitations needed as you progress and see the growth coming or not come. It is not to dictate what will happen. So with that, the master servicing plan will need to continue to go through the process of the class environmental assessment. which does mean having a public information center planned for early 2022, and then following with a report that will be made public and for agencies and council to view. So that is what's coming down the pipe in case you needed to know what the framework is as how I'm presenting this information. So for this slide 16, this is just a list of acronyms that if you needed to refer back to this later date, you can, but I will be using the full set of terms as I'm doing the presentation. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the existing conditions of Millbrook and in terms of facilities as of 2019, the serviced residential units was 776 as of 2019, and that is equivalent to 2,195 residential population with approximately 700 employees. And how we're defining employees here are people who work in Millbrook but may or may not necessarily be living in Millbrook. So in terms of how this population is being serviced, we have a wastewater treatment plant, and it is at 31% of its rated capacity. The current rated capacity is 2,521 cubic meters a day. And it is also at about 37% of the peak capacity, which is a little bit over the 8,000 cubic meters a day. So both of these numbers are important to consider when we're talking about the wastewater treatment plant. In terms of the water treatment plant, it's operating at 33% of the 3,000 cubic meters a day that's available with the wells that are currently operating. And the water storage tank is at about half of what the volume currently gives you. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm not sure if you're seeing a bit of that cut off, but that's fine. So this graphic basically is just to summarize what I had just talked to you about. In the top left there, it tells you the population numbers in the golden bar there with the number of units in the pink, and then the employees in the light blue. So you'll see this kind of graphic over and over again as we add more of the short-term and the long-term growth. In the top right, we show where the current standpipe is, which is by the municipal office. Associated with that is the booster pumping station that is used to supply water to the higher elevation developments, such as Tower Hill South and Tower Hill North. And with that, you'll see that the pie chart is showing approximately 55% of the storage capacity is currently used, with the remainder available for growth. In the bottom right there, you'll see that our wastewater treatment plant is located near Baxter Creek, and there is a sewage pumping station for the downtown core on Tupper Street or County Road 10. And so with the wastewater treatment plant, you see that about 33% is in use, or 31% is in use for average day, but 37 is the percentage for your peak there. So then going to the bottom left is the water treatment plant. And so we have municipal wells there along King Street at the moment. So it is rated for 3,000 cubic meters, and it is at about 33% of its usage. So hopefully that graphic just gives you a quick summary overall of the 2019 conditions. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So in order to grow to the 2026, we considered the planned and in progress developments. This includes Tower Hill South, Tower Hill North, Coldbrook Drive, which was formerly known as Nina Court, as well as various ICI properties that we are made aware of by the township that is near County Road 10 and Falls Line. Please do note, though, that the Tower Hill South, some of the development was already in place in 2019. And so although we're giving you the total number of units of the development here, not all of it is started in 2026. So thank you, Councillor Huntley, for helping us identify that that needs to be clarified. So the more important set of numbers to be looking at is the second bullet there, second large bullet, talking about the servicing. So what are we going to possibly see in 2026? Well, we're estimating the 1,648 residential units, which is up by the 872 additional units from the 2019 date. We are also forecasting that as a result, that would equal to 4,445 residential population. And then the number of employees is going to go from 700 to a bit over the 1,000. And again, these are employees that may not be living in Millbrook, but they will be working in Millbrook. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in order to accommodate this growth, these are the possible facility upgrades that would be required. And so that includes stress testing and re-rating the existing wastewater treatment plant, which currently is at a capacity of 21 cubic meters a day. And what we hope to do is to be able to increase your average day rated capacity to 3,000 with minimal upgrades. So no building expansion, hopefully just tweaking some of the equipment and getting MECP approval for that. In addition, there could be some upgrades to Tupper Street sewage pumping station that is yet to be confirmed. And the booster pumping station that is currently beside the municipal Millbrook office will need to be expanded in terms of its equipment, but not in terms of its footprint. So as a result of that, no further Class EA would be required to implement the design and the construction of these particular upgrades, provided that no land acquisition or building expansions are needed. Again, that is to be seen, but at the moment, that is what we think would be possible. And the total preliminary cost estimate, engineering and capital included, is about the 1.4 million. And we anticipate that that can be funded through development charges. So if those facility upgrades were to happen, what would the servicing usage in terms of capacity mean? Well, for the wastewater treatment plant, it would jump from the 31% to 37%, but keep in mind, we would have upsized the capacity, rated capacity from the 2,500 to 3,000. However, with the re-rating, we won't be able to change the peak capacity. So it will remain at the 8,242, which means that where previously in 2019, it was only at 37% of the peak capacity, it will now jump to 79% of the peak capacity. In terms of the water treatment plant, the capacity there is unchanged from 2019, from your current, with 3,000 cubic meters a day. And we would be looking at about 85% of that being used. In addition, for your water storage tank, we foresee that most of your water storage tank would be used by then in terms of volume. This may or may not happen sooner or later. So the percentage is just an estimate. If the demands were to change and let's say increase, you may need a water storage tank sooner. If the growth does not happen as soon as you think, or if some of the water usage is not as high as you think, then the percentage may drop. So again, these are just approximates at the moment. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a graphic that may look familiar to you. We basically added in the 2019 information and then the 2026 information. So again, on the top left, you'll see that the population comparison in the gold bars and the pink bars are showing the number of units developed between the 2019 and the 2026 forecast. And then the light blue is for the employees. So you'll see in the top right-hand corner, the water storage tank, we're saying it's basically going to be about 99%. So you really do want to be thinking about having a new storage tank shortly after this or within this time frame. If there happens to be additional storage requirement for the immediate sense, the pumping from the wells can compensate for that in a short-term period while the new tank gets constructed. So it's not much of a worry, just something to keep in mind and to keep an eye on. In terms of the wastewater treatment plant there down at the bottom right, like we said, the capacity now is the rated capacity, the average day capacity is not your bottleneck. It's the peak capacity, which remains unchanged. So that is at your 79%. And that means that your next stage of growth will require an increase in the wastewater treatment plant capacity overall for average day as well as for peak. In your bottom left there, that's with the water treatment plant at the 85% capacity. So there's some capacity still left over, but again, to move to the next stage, you would have to be looking at expanding the well field and the water supply available in Millbrook. Okay, so the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is to discuss the servicing of the long-term growth up to 2041. We've listed here the active and anticipated applications that the township has received, some of which are noted as active, some noted as anticipated. The downtown intensification is ongoing, and the northern employment areas are anticipated. Just as a note, the addition of these particular numbers from the development units will not add up to the 3,338. That's because there is a certain amount of unknown in terms of the downtown intensification and the northern employment area. So those numbers will not add up, but it will jive with Watson's numbers in terms of the 3,338 residential units that are being forecasted. And that's how we came about with keeping that number. And it's up to the township how you want to get to that number, given that you have these certain active and anticipated applications in place. So with that, the population forecasted is 8,495, and we gave you the difference as to the additional number of people compared to 2026 and the additional people compared to current 2019. The anticipated number of employees is 2,300. And again, these are the people who will work in Millbrook, but may not necessarily live in Millbrook. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the facilities that are required to be upgraded in order to accommodate this growth then would be the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. And it could mean the addition of a third treatment train. It could be some other alternative that the master servicing plan is currently considering. But for the intents and purposes of the discussion here, we're just posing the third treatment train because you already have an existing wastewater treatment plant with land available for your third train to grow to. In addition to that, you may need a new sewage pumping station in the northern employment lands. Again, it depends on where the sewage is going to go. So that depends on the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. In terms of the groundwater exploration, that will need to happen before you get to the 2041 growth, which means new wells will need to be drilled. And I apologize for any background noise. So the new wells will have to be found in order to increase the water supply for Millbrook. The new booster pumping station may or may not be required. It again depends on where growth occurs. If it is in a higher elevation area and the existing wells are not able to reach that, then the booster station will need to be in place. There would need to be a new water reservoir constructed. It does not necessarily have to be the volume we indicated there. And it really depends on what the demand is like for 2041, but that's an estimate. So it'll be of similar size, if not larger, than what you currently have with the standpipe. Location also does depend on where the growth occurs. You would want to put the water storage in a location that makes sense, which does mean considering topography, but also where the growth is going to be. So these upgrades are going to require another Class EA before the design and construction can occur. And actually that would be to your benefit because you would want to reassess any of these needs and numbers before you get too far along, given that it's a further out timeline. The total project engineering and capital cost estimate on a preliminary scale is 38 million. Now, before you fall off your chair, please keep in mind this is phased. And again, not all of the facilities that are listed here may be required, depending on where growth occurs. And it is anticipated that the funding can come from development charges. So if these facilities were to be upgraded, we anticipate that with the wastewater treatment plant increasing its capacity to 4,500 cubic meters, would have a rated capacity of that, and 89% of that would be used. The water treatment plant would be, with enough water being found, would be at 88% of what we foresee from a theoretical exercise from the hydrogeological reports completed to date, would be 5,374 cubic meters a day compared to the 3,000 you currently have with the existing wells. And in terms of the water storage tank, you would be at about 95% of the total available storage volume of both tanks together. And again, this can be adjusted depending on how big of a storage tank you choose for your second reservoir. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you'll see that this is a similar slide, and we're just adding more and more colors and shapes to this. So from the top left, we are comparing the different population and the growth as it occurs from the 2019 to the 2026 mark to the 2041 mark. So your population forecasted by 2041 is the 8,495. In terms of the map that you see of Millbrook, the black line, solid black line there is the urban settlement area as per the official plan amendment. So you'll see that the different shapes are filling in where we have either planned or active or forecasted anticipated developments. And there are two green areas that are outside of that black line. So we're just showing it at the moment just because the township staff have received something from the developers that are interested, but they have no draft plan approval status, just to get that clarified for you. So going around the circles there, the water storage tank, if the township chose to have a second reservoir of some sort, and you were to essentially double what you currently have in terms of the storage volume, you would be at about 95% with this 2041 growth. The bottom right there with the wastewater treatment plant, that is showing with it having a third train. So your rated capacity is at 4,500 cubic meters a day, and your peak then would be a 16,000. So that's twice your existing peak. And so you would still do fairly well with the wastewater treatment plant at the 89%. Your water treatment plant, assuming that enough water is found, would also be at about 88%. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So talking about growth beyond 2041, the Baxter Creek estimative capacity study will not be able to support the additional wastewater effluent beyond 2041. And this is based on current regulation requirements, particularly due to phosphorus limits and loads and the limit of technology that we have with membrane treatment. So therefore, it's going to prevent additional growth in Millbrook beyond 2041. And I know this may not be the news that you want to hear. However, depending on the design criteria and the technology that happens from now until the time that you need to expand the treatment plant, it is possible that there'll be further treatment improvements and possibly reductions of what you can achieve for phosphorus. So that could still leave things a little bit open-ended, but for the most part, you will have a limitation because of your wastewater capacity that the Baxter Creek can take. In addition, your Millbrook groundwater supply would be near its capacity based on the theoretical hydrogeological reports done to date. Of course, we won't really know definitively until we actually start drilling wells and seeing what is achievable and making sure that it doesn't impact any other existing local wells. So with that, the forecasted township growth for Cavan Monaghan beyond 2041 will likely have to occur outside of the Millbrook urban settlement area. So further investigations and discussions will need to consider where that might end up being. And that's currently beyond our scope of work. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps then, Public Works does plan to provide an updated report to Council on next steps, some of which will include the fact that the Peterborough County will be providing an update on local municipal growth projections on October 29th. And Watson and township staff are working with Peterborough County to discuss the growth and land needs to 2051 in the entire township. After these discussions, Watson will be able to finalize the updated growth management study with the township staff and bring it back to council at a later date. In addition, with the water and wastewater master servicing study, we will be progressing into a public information center, as I said, for early 2022. And then with that, we will be finalizing with a report later that year to discuss more details as to how things iron out and with public comments. So Public Works hopes to be able to provide a final master servicing recommendation to council on that again in 2022. And I believe that is the end of that presentation.
Thank you very much, Rika. Questions from members of council? Oh, I got a face wiping. We're going to start with Councillor Huntley.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Law, for your presentation. And I know we did discuss earlier some of the numbers. And obviously, I'm looking forward to kind of seeing a little more clarity in how you got to some of the numbers in there. So I'll not pepper you with, how did that percentage work? but I do hope to see a much more clear picture on how those numbers are derived. I guess my question, though, then is we talked about the growth rates, with Watson and whatnot, and what I'm seeing here is almost a 400% growth in 20 years for the village of Millbrook. Does that not set off some alarm bells? Or not sound a little odd? It seems awfully huge. And is it sustainable to grow by 400% in 20 years?
And that's through you, Mayor, to Councillor Huntley. We do understand and appreciate that that is a very large jump. It is something that we're just following through with Watson and their numbers. But in terms of serviceability, you are able to service up to that, and then unfortunately not beyond that. So again, with what I was saying early on, we're presenting to you what can happen, but not necessarily what will happen. And this is where the township and council members will have to consider what it is that you want to achieve and what you're being told you have to achieve.
So I guess follow-up question that, Mr. Mayor, is with the report that you have provided, I mean, the one thing that's kind of missing in it is what is the theoretical capacity of these facilities, one, without upgrading anything, and two, after they've been upgraded. Like we kind of see where they're, the projection of the capacity that's used in it, but we don't actually see what the ceiling is. Like, where are they full? And at how much growth, do we need to kick off the next stage of these things? I know it's probably might not have been in the scope of what you were asked to do, but I think that's kind of the, when it comes down to it, that's what, as a council, I think that's what we're really looking to know is, how much can we grow, not theoretically, what we can grow. Sorry, I take that back. We also want to know theoretically how much we can grow, but we want to know, also, what's the capacity of our growth before we have to invest in this stuff.
So
I'm hoping with whatever comes back that's taken into serious consideration as well.
Perfect. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Huntley, thank you for expressing that. We are trying to show the limitations of each of the facilities as we were discussing along, but we can definitely give you more information on where our numbers came from to hopefully solidify that limitation or the glass ceiling for you on that. Now, keep in mind that a lot of these numbers get a little hazy as we get further out. And what we are seeing, though, is that your limitations really come from what Baxter Creek is able to assimilate in terms of the effluent, particularly in regard to phosphorus, and also in terms of what the Millbrook well field can provide in terms of water. So those are where your limitations, hard line limitations are. Now there are soft limitations, again, depending on technology and the amount of water usage per person or what kind of industries come in, if it's wet industries or dry industries. These will then all come into play as to moving your trigger point a little bit this way or that way, sooner or later, if that helps to answer that question. I know it's not definitive, hard, fast numbers that you may be hoping for.
No, that does answer it. I mean, another component of that is, a $34 million investment in a $27 million building in order to increase its capacity by, less than 50%. Is also a huge consideration.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you. Thanks for that presentation, Rika. It was lots to think about and lots to look ahead to, I guess. I guess my concern is a complicated one, but when we've talked about overlaying sort of both components of the presentation, in the initial construction of the wastewater treatment plant, there was an understanding that there would be a substantial component of that capacity reserved to be dedicated towards employment. And, when we look at the initial slides, we see sort of that the slowing of the rate of that employment growth. And then when we get into some of the later discussions, we see these nice projections about employment growth and the substantial incremental sort of piggybacking along with the residential growth. But when it comes to the employment growth, we're not held to the same legislative requirements to accommodate and infill and develop. And my concern is, how are we going to be able to ensure that the pressure for residential growth doesn't cannibalize the component of servicing capacity that we are trying to and well intended to keep for employment purposes? Because the way it's presented to me, the pressure is astronomical, and the interest, from my limited understanding, is from the development community, is not to spur along the complications of employment. They would much prefer to develop residential housing because there's an appetite there that knows no bounds. And especially with a market that in the condition that it's in now, it's astronomical from a pricing standpoint. So I guess, and then you add another layer to that, with that sort of residential growth or employment growth or growth en masse, there's institutional requirements that also have, like whether it's school expansions and things like that. There's other things that I don't know if we've captured that are also going to factor into that requirement for that capacity. And my concern is that if we are going to suggest that it's going to be funded by development charges, well, that's great as long as some of those development charges are commercial in nature, that we're obtaining that employment. But I'm worried, and I'm looking for any member of staff or the team and the presentation to sort of explain to me how that is going to be maintained so that we do have employment growth that will have capacity for employment, because without it, we won't get it.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Deputy Mayor Graham. If we go to slide 21, and I'll try my best to address your question there. It is a good question, and it is a question that not just the township is wrestling with. A lot of the other municipalities that we are doing master servicing plans for also is wrestling with, because you're right. The demand is for residential and not employment, but unless you want to turn the community into a bedroom community where they either work virtually or they just don't have the employment in the town itself, it becomes a problem of making sure you safeguard the areas for employment, and also making sure the servicing for employment is going to be available when it does come. And it may end up following the residential growth. So in this slide here, at least up to 2026, the areas that are shown in the Millbrook aerial map there with the sort of golden area, this is the areas that we have included as the known ICI, so commercial properties and whatnot, that we were able to get a more solid estimate as to what the water and the wastewater demands would be. So we have included that into our calculations here. So at least you have that much solidified in with our calculations. Now, with the 2041 slide, which is slide 24, you do see that there is this big blue, darker blue swath on the northern portion. And at the moment, in working with township staff, that is still very much unknown as to what kind of employment that would entail, if it is a dry industry, if it's a wet industry. And that makes it kind of hard for us to put some sort of flows to it. So at the moment, we've been asked to at least just consider it as dry industry. So not requiring much water, nor requiring much wastewater, but at least the employees that work there will have some allocation for them to drink the water while they're working and go to the washroom, and what's needed for their just employment use itself, but not so much for the industries that might be coming, because that is still something that's unknown.
I think just to add to that, Mr. Mayor, if I can, through to you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we were following the numbers, of course, from the growth study, and so what Rika has noted there in the light blue is saying that we are protecting for that servicing capacity as we go forward, both to 2026 and 2041. Wow. So when we look at growth up to 226 and expansion, we're also taking into account that we have accommodated the employment as projected through our numbers with C.N. Watson. I think that's fair, Rika?
In terms of employee needs, yes, but not so much if there was a food processing plant that comes in, then that would be an unknown.
I think the comment is the determination of the type of industry will allow us to relook at that, but we are certainly protecting for them. I think even in the projected large number of 38 million, there's a pumping station that we looked at in the employment lands that we're not sure that we need it this time, but we're protecting for that. So I think we've taken into account the employment. I know council wants to see employment. So we're sort of safeguarding that we have capacity, both water and wastewater as we go forward. So we're working very closely, I'd say, with the CN Watson report to accommodate that. The other comment I'd like to make is about the existing wastewater treatment plant and standpipe that was put in place. And you might remember some of the numbers that we talked about when we started this process back in, I think, around 2015. We talked about 1,000 equivalent units. And that was kind of a terminology that was used for the design of what we put in place. And I think you're finding that we're much higher than what I'd call 1,000 equivalent units with what we have now. And we are doing that with the existing infrastructure. The upgrades that are looked at to 2026 are included in the development charge bylaw, are being incorporated. So they will be paid for by development charges, and that allows us to incorporate and take in all of Tower Hill North, and then we have to start looking at where we go forward. But we have I think the plant has done well, and the dollars have done well to accommodate more than it was even planned for originally. So and RVA was key to that when we started. So I just wanted to make that comment on their behalf.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hancock. I don't know if this is to Mr. Hancock or Mr. Conley, but when we originally completed the official plan 8 years ago, we put in place phasing, not only phasing between different residential developments, but also phasing to ensure that we were going to get the employment that went alongside. So we started with the phase one, which saw Highlands South or Tower Hill South. And we really haven't seen any of the corresponding employment to go with it. And now we have complete applications for a couple more. We also have one that's already approved. But again, we're still not seeing the employment. So at what point can we as a council say enough? We want some employment, and because right now there's no incentive. The housing market is out of control. You literally could sell a tent in this market and make a good profit with that. I mean, it's nuts. So when do we just say enough? Done. We're closed shop. No more residential development until we get some employment going through. Because amazingly, it's going to come through, and there is employment opportunities out there. We can see it. Employment lands right now are very hot purchase, and they're going off the market really quickly too. Anything we've seen is disappeared pretty quickly. So it's not that the employment opportunities aren't out there. It's that they're not being given an opportunity to get into the lands that we've already designated and we've got set aside for employment in the hopes that there's going to be more residential numbers first. So it's not so much I'm concerned about the reservation of the 20%. I'm more concerned about let's get some employment now, because that's what we're waiting for, and then we can proceed with more residential. So I don't know who's side of the bucket, but I see a hand over there from John.
John's a better lead on that one.
All right, John, over to you. If it doesn't go well, then deflect it back to Wayne.
Sure, through your worship to the rest of council. So we are seeing active employment files. In fact, even though I'll remind you of a report that we have later on the agenda with respect to 1066 Higher Line. The idea is that we do have lands that are strategically positioned to be ripe for employment. We have had a lot of activity on lands that are there for employment, on lands down street, on Sire Line, on other properties. So there is employment that's coming to the township as a whole. I know from a department standpoint, we have a number of pre-consultations, and it does take time. And so, but that is happening. Those inquiries are there. The pre-consultation is happening. There is a lot of work that has to go into bringing that forward. So that is happening. With respect to the employment lands within the urban employment lands, there are opportunities there. These do take a while. I will remind council that in the early part of this year, you did change and did support the changing of the commercial piece on the southwest corner of Fallis and 10, County Road 10, which is zone commercial. It is actually just waiting right now for a tenant and for other discussions to go forward with the two applications that were deemed complete and are proceeding through the analysis and the processing on the east side, southeast corner of Fallis Line East and County Road 10. There is a large commercial component employment piece there on that front on County Road 10 with some residential in the back, so it's a bit of a mixed. There is infill opportunity, or there are infill opportunities, and again, employment is going forward and it is going across the township. We would like to see more, and we have indicated certainly in our discussions with the applications before they were submitted, even for Fallis Line East and County Road 10, we did indicate that we are interested in seeing the employment come first. It is a priority of council. We have been doing that and reinforcing that, as well as the work we've been doing on Sire Line. And even from a departmental standpoint, we have economic development, we have lands on Elmdale, we have other lands that we promote and other opportunities. So it is active. I can absolutely appreciate council frustration. We aren't seeing that as much, but I think like anything, it's a matter of at some point we'll hit a critical mass, because of the corners of a lot of the intersections along the 115 and any of the other township roads that meet that, there are opportunities there and across the board. So I do see that there's real opportunity to that. It does take time, and for the commercial component, just given the nature of COVID, I do see that it has been a bit slower in some respects, but in the same time, employment is coming. And we do, in our discussions with developers and with proponents coming forward, we do indicate that we want to see a balance. That to us is a complete community. In order to get our support at a staff level to go forward with planning applications as part of the planning justification report, is that we talk about the idea that there has to be a mixture of residential employment. But again, I can certainly tell by your frustration that it's something we want to see sooner than later, but at the staff level and through our policy documents and as we process these, we make sure that is heard and that we will proceed as such. So I hope that answers part of it, but I'm not sure. I don't have an office tower showing up next week, but I would love to have one if there's even one that exists in the GTA.
Very good. So I guess my question is, at what point can we say we're not, you can send in your applications, but we are not giving out any more allocation until we've used some employment allocation? Now, in other words, that's great. You can keep piling them on, keep bringing in the applications, but we're done. Like, you got to start moving. We've designated lands within the urban area. We've got service industrial lands, service employment lands that are available. And quite frankly, if you just look at our map, that's the largest employment service, potentially serviced employment lands in all of Peterborough County that I'm aware of. So I know it's not that that the opportunities aren't there for employment. I can appreciate it. It's just not a priority for residential developers to move ahead with. I appreciate it and I understand that. But what teeth do we have to enforce our phasing that we put into our official plan? Enough is enough. The next thing is going to be jobs.
Through your worship, to the balance account council, what I can indicate is that our challenge is that, you know, our policy document talks about a mix and how we bring employment to population. We can certainly do that. We can emphasize that with developers as they go forward. The challenge we have with the two large pieces of urban employment we have within the township is that this is a bit of a long game. So each one of those is under single ownership, so that presents a challenge. My understanding is that there is certainly activity and interest in the property, the largest swath, which is on the east side of County Road 10, on the east side across from the municipal office. So if you're looking for tools, we can certainly look at that. I think in terms of our allocation policy right now, as council would approve, what we have in the mill and what has been approved is part of an allocation policy. Perhaps when we look at through the master servicing study and then going forward with the information about the growth management strategy that Watson is doing, is we look at, as we bring this to ground, the allocation policy reflecting that. The previous one did, because we had held some in reserve, and I think again we're sending out the message loud and clear that we are open for business. We want to do that. Again, I can only control what staff will bring to council. Council can, for its reasons, decide otherwise. And I know that's not satisfactory, but I do see across the board within the township, a lot of employment happening. I think for the most part, a lot of it is small and medium enterprise, and that's happening in pockets. We have some success stories. I'll call to your attention when we had the one Harley Davidson dealership leave, almost seamlessly another company came in that came from Orono and also from the States. They've gone into that business. They're actually growing in that business and looking for other land elsewhere. So we do where we can, and that sometimes that's a quick turnaround. Sometimes it's a longer term investment.
Very good. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Graham, I see you've been waving your hand and you've been very patient. Go ahead.
Oh, I just put it up intermittently just to make sure it still works. I guess
Still works.
From my understanding, in the OP, we do have a ratio of employment to growth, right, and to residential growth. And I understand that it probably, especially to be as reductive as a 3-to-1 ratio, doesn't bear a lot of teeth when it comes into, the most common applications. But, maybe we should be flexing that muscle more, and by informing and actually counting and calculating where we are at in relation to that ratio. Because, to the mayor's point, the ratio was there for a reason, to sort of address that concern that there would be sort of some temperates or some buffering with regards to, incremental growth of not just one type. And, that is a policy in the OP that, is reflected, but I don't think we calculate or take inventory of where we're at with different plans of subdivision versus, how far away we're getting from that ratio. And maybe if we did, and it kind of stems from my earlier comment about understanding where we're at from, these different buckets of, different densities of growth or intensifications of growth, likewise, if we were counting and calculating these sorts of developments in the municipality to see, okay, well, we are 100 employment, additional jobs or however you want to calculate it, away from sustaining that 3-to-1 ratio. Well, I guess, like to the mayor's point, well, until we establish that, we can't really be moving forward with any additional residential development. And that's by enumerating it, we actually give it more weight than just a 3-to-1 ratio that, gets glazed over. And I think that might be, I'd be curious to hear staff's feedback as to if that would actually be a benefit or actually be something that we can, an existing policy that can be more enhanced on how it's monitored and, actually utilized and tracked in the experience of the municipality and how we move forward.
So through your worship to Deputy Mayor Graham, I think I can answer that in a couple of ways. I think one of the things that I'm hearing is that you need to have an understanding from a council's perspective of where we are relative to employment, our targets, and also the ratio that's there within the official plan. Keep in mind that we are updating the official plan and its policies to do that, and we are working with the county to make sure that their OP would be there. So I think from that perspective, we'd also like to see those policies carry forward and perhaps more teeth. Legally, I'm not sure we can stop processing applications. We certainly can't, if there isn't allocation or isn't the ability to be able to service those, we wouldn't be able to do that. But the long-term goal is that as we look at, let's take, for example, Millbrook, which is the map in front of you, where do we see opportunities for employment? We designate lands and hold them aside and make sure that we don't have conversions of those employment lands for residential. I would probably say that if you were to look to the jurisdiction to the west in Durham, they have a significant number of lands that have been identified as employment. But when they were going through this similar exercise of their municipal comprehensive review, they have a lot of pressure to convert those employment lands. We're not experiencing that. We're trying to attract it. The other thing I would also draw your attention to is in the population numbers, there is an undercount, and there's also within the work from home, there are a number of people who, let's not just get fooled that a population is a number. There are jobs that are associated with the population based on work from home opportunities, people who are trades, commute, that sort of thing. And there's an undercount in StatsCan as well. So even though we're talking people, there are jobs associated with, if you take, for example, the Tower Hill North, even though it may be a residential subdivision, there are a certain number, and maybe Jamie could speak to that, is there is an assumption with respect to the number of jobs that are generated just from people living and working from home, that type of thing. But I think loud and clear, I think what you need as a council is to understand where you are as applications come forward, Where does that move the needle? Does it meet the densities? And it doesn't. What other policies can we have in place to try and encourage that? But I think, again, overall, looking at a 30-year horizon, looking at what the township would look like in its entirety, and what you have there in front of you is a 20-year view of what Millbrook would look like from a service perspective. It is handy to be able to hold out the land in terms of the allocation, I should say, for ICI, for building, for employment, that sort of thing. And also with the idea of like when things are going forward as a council saying, we want to see more. But again, I think one of the first steps is you brought building, economic development, planning together as in one department. So we are very mindful of that. We try to report and monitor that. We'll continue to do so. But if you need us to be more aggressive, perhaps there are policies with the LP that we can do to encourage that. But it is a bit of a wait and see game, unfortunately. And perhaps even the CAO would be able to give some perspective on that as well from her background.
I am looking. Ms. Hurley, has the baton been passed? We skipped right over Mr. Hancock.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if I can add anything more than what Mr. Conley has already identified, actually.
Okay. If we go to, okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to make a closing comment just in response to that.
I'm not done.
No, I meant for myself, Mayor. For myself.
Get comfy.
No, I just on that issue, to me, there's already starting to be rumblings of that exact sort of pressure from that Durham is experiencing that you alluded to, John. So if we haven't opened the door yet, it doesn't mean it's not on the doorstep, knocking away and ringing the bell. So that's my concern, is that the development game can wait for decades. It's a different timeline than a municipal timeline, and there's no correlation between the two, and there's no need to. So, I don't understand how municipally we're going to be able to create that urgency and the pressure when we're going to be held to growth targets at a provincial level that totally disregard any sort of employment component to them or respectful of the OP and those sorts of ratios. That pressure is here, whether it showed up or been asked for or not yet formally. It's here. And that's my concern, is that we are going to, but because of the lack of that pressure and our inability to preserve and ensure the true fulfillment of a complete community by having a balance of both employment, institutional, as well as residential development, we're not going to have that. It doesn't pursue any sort of normal or reasonable ideal of a complete community. And, we're going to be held hostage on a timeline for growth targets for residential that are going to just cannibalize any sort of intentions that we had for an employment deadline. And yeah, we might make some inroads here and there. I mean, we're going to the furthest extent of any municipality I know of trying to purchase lands for the point of trying to get commercial and employment development. Like, that's how desperate we are. And I'm hoping that reality is going to be very evident and reflective in the work that we're doing to the OP. And, because the deck is so stacked against us that, I just hope that we come up with as creative solutions as we can to sort of just enforce that or pursue that as best we can. So I think I've said enough on that. So thank you.
So to put this into sort of a numbers perspective, and so I'm going to ask to go to slide number 19. Sorry, it's confusing. 19 top, we're in 22. Yes. So here we have our expected short-term growth to approximately 2026, and I get they're all approximations. It's certainly I'm certainly not picking on the numbers, Rika. You've done a wonderful job. So the very last one under servicing 4, it has 1,094 employees, which is in brackets 394 additional from the existing. So 394. So 1,000. So let's use the whole 1,094. That's 1,094 from 394 is from 2019. That's what our baseline is. Okay, so basically 400 employees. So now if you flip to 2 pages forward to 21, servicing of short-term growth. No, the other direction, sorry. Yes. If you look at the urban area, that's purple, which is where the residential growth is occurring. You've got Tower Hill South, you've got Tower Hill North, and you've got the subdivision at the bottom, which is called Coldbrook Drive. So you see those in purple. And in orange, which represents the employment, we have the piece on the corner of Fallis and County Road 10. You've got the township office and the community center, which I will eliminate because there's no new employment to count there. So literally we're left with the orange above and below the unopened road allowance of Fallis and a little piece on the corner, of which to 2026, we're going to put 394 additional people into that little area. However, we don't have any applications for those necessarily at this point, but we do, and it's not on here, have complete applications for residential development surrounding the orange on the east side. We also have a complete application to the west of Tower Hill South, which isn't included in this all the way to 2026. So there again, we continue to pile on the residential, and I don't believe we're going to be able to, even if we could, put 394 employment positions within that little wee box that we have on the goal for 2021. And then when we state that we're maintaining 20% capacity, if you look at these charts, we're already at 99% for the standpipe, and we're not going to have it once the east and the west purple developments that have complete applications are before us. We're not going to have any capacity left at the standpipe, and we're going to have filled it all with residential. So again, we don't have 20% left over. So I guess it comes back to the original thing. And I believe all of council is on the same page. It's not the issue with the residential development. It's that we were promised employment lands, and all this study does, it's no disrespect to the study. It's a wonderful study, but all this study does is tell us that we need to continue to expand. And when we continue to expand, we just create that 20% still there. Well, of course it's still there because you keep adding on, but we've never actually recognized the employment. We're just adding on so we can recognize more residential. So what I really want to know, not a long answer, the short answer, what can we as council do to say enough? We're done with the residential until you bring us the employment. We're not saying we won't process your applications, but what's the point of putting in phase-in in an official plan from 2013 if at some point we can't enforce it? We're just asking to move ahead with some of this employment before we process any more residential. It's a simple request. It's in our official plan. There's got to be some teeth in something that says enough's enough.
Your worship, are you?
I saw complete silence. Everybody's screen just
A
froze.
hot potato in the township office.
Freeze. No, no. Your worship, through council, again, what I hear you loud and clear is saying that we want this. What I can say is that being able to attract the employment has to have a couple things. It has to have the lands available in order to be serviced, and that is here, and that is obvious. There is frustration in terms of it's not coming fast enough, but I would also remind you that these things go in cycles, and at the same time, we've just been going through 18, 20 months of COVID. So even during that time, on a departmental standpoint, we have gone up 340, 350% in terms of planning inquiries, but that's not just solely for residential, that is also for employment opportunities. So we have had that interest. All of the interchanges that go along the 1 foot, the 115, all along those clover leaves, we have a lot of interest. We work actively, we promote, and we work with developers and proponents as they come forward. We have a lot of pre-consultation meetings with the idea of enhancing that. And as the deputy mayor had identified, we certainly have gone to the step of where the council 2 years ago had strategically bought lands to be able to bring these things forward. All of those are things from the standpoint, the ground is fertile, the opportunities are there. And from a county-wide perspective, this is why the slide deck is reinforcing the fact is we are well positioned to be able to capture any employment that comes to the county. We'll be able to capture the lion's share of doing it. We can look at the LP policies, and certainly within our local OP, but also within the exercise with the county to make sure that there's language that talks about that. Short of that may not be satisfactory enough for you, but I think, again, as a priority on a day-to-day basis, as we deal with the business of the municipality, we reinforce that, we emphasize that, and I do see that there are opportunities coming forward.
Okay, so I think the short answer is, because I'm not so concerned about outside of the serviced area, I think the short answer is, and to Councillor Huntley's point, we're maxed out by 2026. I know you wanted an end date if we do nothing. By 2026, we have 1% left on the standpipe, and that's only if we put $1.4 million. So it'd be safe to say we're done sometime before 2026 if no further investments are in. So I think it'd be worthwhile of the council, if we feel that way, to just say, we're done. We have no more allocation. And you know what? That's a solid answer for why we can't accept any more residential applications, because quite frankly, we have no more allocation. We need our 20%, back it out, and that'll actually put a stop to some of these current residential applications that are going forward. We have no allocation. And quite frankly, don't talk to us about allocation until we start to see unemployment. And that's not through any sort of magical official plan tool or any legislation. At the end of the day, council has to approve improvements to our infrastructure. And when we stop spending, they have to stop building. So I don't know how we want to formulate it, but I think that may very well be the only way that we can go down this path. They have full ability to put employment in there. I know it's just not a priority. At some point, we need to make it a priority. And at the end of the day, if we need to send a message of we're done, then that will be what we have to do. But I think council's pretty much on the same page on this one, and it's infuriating to see in this environment that we don't have employment going in. And I'm tired of the excuses, because the opportunities are out there. I know they're out there, and I know we can do it. So I guess that answers Councillor Huntley's question of when are we done. Any other questions on that note? Oh, Ms. Hurley has a question. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think to bring it back to a point as well, through Deputy Graham, was comments about the province states about our growth numbers. And they always talk about our growth numbers related to residential, but they don't speak to them related to employment. So I think that that's a key factor as well, you know, because we're to adhere to growth requirements. And obviously you're going to hear about that coming down soon when the county finishes their land needs study, but they don't speak to legislation or requirements pertaining to employment, which puts us all in a very difficult position. I just wanted to bring that up, because if you're talking about what can we do, we can set policies, we can set aside allocation, we can hold on to our percentages, but you're right. At the end of the day, they can still make an application, and it doesn't necessarily have to have employment. Some of the properties that we have are owned by certain developers that concentrate on residential, not necessarily on commercial or employment. And some property is owned by developers that concentrate on employment. But what you see right now is more of the other side, because the province is making a huge push on residential development right now as well.
I think what would be really helpful, and I don't know if this is part of the next study that's going to come back, is in light of our current state with our wastewater treatment plant and where we are at, what does that actually associate to 20% for the employment side, and what's the 80% for all of the other side? What is that number, so we know how many more residential we need to approve? And then all we're left is the 20%. That's all we got left at the wastewater treatment plant, and the system as a whole is that 20%. And with council's direction, we just don't, that's it, we're done. We're not moving forward with anything else until that 20% has been hit. And I think we'll absolutely be amazed how quickly that 20% is going to get solved before we do any additions on the rest of the extension. So I'd really like to see that number. What's the maximum number that qualifies for that 80% for the residential, so that we know what qualifies for the 20%. And then I think council's got some decisions to make at that point to see how we want to move forward.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, to answer that, I think we can provide that information. It is part of RECA's calculations to date, so we can certainly have it for our next report there.
Perfect, because I do believe that's on sound means to not approve an application if they don't have sufficient allocation. I think that's that goes above and beyond that. That is one thing that council can do. All right, unless there's any further questions, I'm going to ask for a motion to receive the delegation. It's been a very long delegation. Thank you very much, both to Rika and to Jamie. It's been a very provoking and involved discussion. Oh, Councillor Belch, I can barely see it, but I saw a pen up there. I got the.
There you go.
There, okay. I got a Councillor Belch on a mover and a Deputy Mayor Graham on a seconder.
With a comment though, Scott, we had discussed earlier about incorporating some sort of consideration of affordable housing targets and providing staff with that direction. I can try to come up with a motion for you. I think it'd be fairly generic, but I know it had been discussed that staff might have been contemplating that, and I just didn't want that to be missed.
Okay, I was going to do it as a separate motion, so we didn't
Okay, fair enough,
this one up.
fair
Okay. Madam Clerk, record a vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Motion is approved. And second motion from Deputy Mayor Graham in that staff bring back a report with suggestions on how we can incorporate the requirement to have affordable housing in the official plan. Does that work? I tried to keep it generic.
Yeah, I had something similar.
No, I didn't have anything actually. I just made that one up.
I think
Your
this
worship, your worship,
Go
if I
ahead,
may.
Mr. Connolly.
Sorry, I interrupted the deputy mayor.
No.
So your worship, I think what you were looking for, you was specifically talking about inclusionary zoning, Bill 108, and some of the tools there. So I think the idea would be to how can staff bringing back a report that talks about how some of the provisions within Bill 108 and other such tools can be incorporated within the OP or elsewhere within our planning tools regulations to be able to promote and be able to advance targets with respect to affordable housing, working of course with the county and the city as the housing service provider as well. Like we can, I think that type of thing is what you're looking at.
Yes, it is. And our clerk says thank you for the long motion.
Was that an endorsement of the motion, John? I don't know.
I think my speech ended there. So.
You're absolutely correct.
Part motion.
You're absolutely correct. That's the intention of to go in that route. I just thought I'd keep it highly generic and absolutely we'll go into those tools. As long as Madam Clerk is okay with that, or would you prefer the longer one?
For you, Mayor McFadden, I will turn to Ms. Hurley as well as Mr. Conley. I just have exactly what Mr. Conley's just said, that staff report back to look at incorporating provisions of Bill 108 and such tools to promote and advance targets for affordable housing. I'm assuming it's with collaboration of the County of Peterborough.
Okay, all right. Sounds like a good motion. You okay with that, Deputy Mayor? Yes, we got a mover, seconder. Councillor Moore, I don't see your hand, but I'm going to take you as a seconder. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I can hit star if you want me to.
No, we're good. There we go. All right, we got it. We got a seconder from Councillor Moore. Very good. Madam Clerk, record a vote.
Can I just confirm to you, Mayor McFadden, that Ms. Hurley as well as Mr. Conley are okay with that motion?
I don't see them wiping their faces or leaving the camera.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Page, I'm fine with that.
I can work with that.
We'll call for the vote. Mayor McFadden?
Yes.
Councillor Huntley?
Yes.
Councillor Belch?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham?
Yes.
And Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Motion is approved. And with that, we're going to do a long needed break.
How long, Mr. Mayor?
5 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, who do we have? Councillor Belch, we got Councillor Belch and Councillor Moore, you'll just have to unmute yourself and let us know, or maybe Ms. Page can unmute Councillor Moore.
Did that work?
There you go. You are on. Okay. All right. We have all of
Okay.
council here. We must have the clerk.
Yes, we do.
And then we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, excellent. So next item is minutes of the regular council meeting held October 4th, 2021. A motion to adopt those minutes. Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
I'm mute, Tim.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Belch, you're on mute. Everybody was muted at the break time, so some of us have to unmute. Other ones already have. There we go.
There we go. Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Madam Clerk, I've got 5 sets of minutes here. Can I do it with one motion to approve them all or no?
If you'd like to, Mayor McFadden, we can.
Okay, motion for all those minutes. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley.
Sorry.
Clerk?
Sorry. Let me interrupt that. I apologize. No, I was jumping through to your BIA one. You have, because you adopt your Mr. Hack and MVT, but you just receive your BIA. So if you want to clump the first 2, you can.
All
Or
right,
your, okay.
first 2.
Just
Thank you,
stick
Madam.
to what, okay.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. You keep us out of trouble. We got a mover and a seconder from Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote for the first 2 items.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Please don't choke on us. Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. For Councillor Huntley, you got to make it. Do you want to make a motion for the next 3?
Sure. I'm good
All
now.
right, we got a mover for the next 3 on the BIA. Seconder, Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
and Councillor Huntley.
Motion is approved. Moving along, item 9.1, report planning 2021-54, update status report 1066 tire line update. Mr. Conley, are we all on schedule?
Short answer, yes, we are. Thank you.
Very good.
No, through your worship, you have before you, through you to council, you have planning report 2021-54, and this is again the status report with respect to Sire Line. Recommendation being that council receive report planning 2021-54, the update status report 1066 Sire Line for information. Again, as we have been doing for most of this year, I've been providing regular updates to council with respect to the work that's being done there. I can actually go a little bit beyond what we have, which is the bottom of the first page of the report, which is page 53 in the agenda, which is that all of the reports have been finalized and all of the reports have been submitted to the county for peer review, in the sense that getting in the cost estimate. So the agricultural impact assessment is one that Stantec, and the Hydro-G study as well as one that Stantec does as a peer review for the county. We've got a cost estimate for one. The other one we just got it on the weekend, I guess Friday, and so that will be one that is again will be peer reviewed by Stantec on behalf of the county. The EIS is peer reviewed by Orca, and there's no cost associated with that. So I just wanted to bring you up to date with respect to that. That's a little bit different than what you have in the written report. But things, again, the work that's being done remains on schedule. The idea is that once they undergo the peer review, and staff are right now starting to develop the planning reports, the plan justification report, as well as all the other information that goes with the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment. And that's proceeding as scheduled and as outlined in the Gantt chart, which is attachment 1 to the report.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Conley? None. Motion to receive that report. We're going to go with Councillor Moore and Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you, Mr. Conley. Next item 9.2, report corporate services 2021-19 procedural bylaw update. Ms. Page, tell us how you're going to change how we run these meetings.
An amendment was made through you, Mayor McFadden, to the rest of council. Amendment was made to the Municipal Elections Act to change the term of council. So now the term of council will start on November 15th, where formerly it was December 15th. So we just need to change our inaugural to, I believe the easiest way to do this is the first Monday following November 15th of each regular election year, as is the recommendation and the attached procedural bylaw.
Very good. Any questions for Ms. Page? Seeing none, motion to receive the report and accept the recommendation. Councillor Huntley and Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Moore.
yes,
Motion is approved. Our next item is 9.3, report CAO 2021-07 COVID-19 vaccination policy. Ms. Hurley?
Good afternoon, Mayor McFadden, members of council. I just would like to make sure that we have included Matthew Savino. If
And
we've
there
let
he
him
is.
in. Okay, thank you.
Matthew, thank you very much for being very patient. We had very involved council discussions this morning, and if you were listening to them, you might be bored out of your mind, but they were very very necessary.
I wasn't bored out of my mind. I was lurking a little bit on the consultant reports on growth in the community and the employment stuff, and it was quite interesting. So I appreciate you including me, actually.
Very good.
Thank you through Mayor McFadden and council. So Matthew and I are here to present the COVID-19 vaccine policy before council. The recommendation is that council direct staff to ensure the implementation and administration of all aspects of the COVID-19 vaccine policy. Right off the bat, I would like to thank Matthew incredibly for his time and effort that he's put into the vaccine policy. He hasn't only just worked for the municipality of Cavan-Monaghan, but I know that he's been implementing a policy across Peterborough County with the other municipalities as well. And it's a tremendous amount of work, if you can imagine, with everything that's been going on with COVID-19 in the past year and a half. So the report, or the policy before you, is basically, what we've got before you is Peterborough County Health Unit has issued strong recommendations to workplaces. Policies include requirements that employees will become vaccinated with COVID-19 unless they're otherwise medically exempt. The recommendation that we have before you is that we've drafted a policy for employees, including full-time, part-time, permanent, temporary, as well as elected officials, committee members, volunteers, students, and contractors. This will also include newly hired employees will be fully vaccinated. We've been reasonable. We've put forward a reasonable accommodation measures within the policy. And Matthew can maybe speak to more of the reasons why we've taken and chosen this. There has been a lot of controversy and a lot of discussions throughout the municipal world about how to either accommodate or how to address these policies in different ways. We feel that we best outlined what we think is reasonable based on the directives of today. And therefore, we have put accommodations in place for our employees as well as volunteers, for example, and to carry out proof of ID, to identify these the requirements as of November 1st. And well, I'm not sure, Matthew, if you want to add anything more pertaining to the policy that we've identified and the procedures that we're proposing to take place if and should council adopt this policy today.
Yeah, no, I mean, just a couple of comments. So, Yvette has taken our policy that we recommended, but she has fine-tuned it, and I would suggest, Yvette, you strengthened a little bit further than what our stock recommendation was, but there's basically seems to be emerging three approaches. The first approach, which we don't recommend you entertain, is to do nothing. This is a strong recommendation of Peterborough Public Health, but you're not required, strictly speaking, to implement a policy. I'll go to the other end of the spectrum. What PRHC, the regional hospital, has done, and Ross Memorial, and I understand the county has done this too. They've implemented quite strong policies that if an employee refuses to vaccinate, and not for medical or religious exemptions, just a personal choice refuses to vaccinate, there's a period of unpaid leave followed by ultimately and potentially termination. We believe with the hospital emergency room, I think that policy is appropriate and enforceable. For employers who are not running ICU units, I'm not sure. It'll be interesting. Your policy and our recommendation balances those approaches, we think, in a prudent way that does not invite conflict and controversy with some staff members who may, for personal reasons or otherwise, decide not to vaccinate. I guess the only difference between what you have and what we've implemented with some other municipalities and employers outside of the municipal practice, Yvette's included a line here, and it makes yours a bit stronger, put some teeth in it. If employees choose not to be vaccinated and refuse testing, they may receive up to a 30-day unpaid suspension, and after a further period of 30 days, disciplinary action, including termination. So that puts you a little bit closer to the I'll call it the county policy, which and the PRHC policy, which we think for the most part, unless your PRHC goes too far. And so I think your policy on balance is a little stronger than what we've recommended and very prudent otherwise.
Very
And
good.
through that,
Go ahead.
through that, Mayor McFadden and council members, the reason why we identified that line is we stated disciplinary actions, including termination, will be considered. And so we took that advice from our legal as well. And so it was sort of a combination between Matthew Savino assisting us in our HR and our legal recommendation that we received from Mr. Helinski.
Very good. And with that, any questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and through you. No real questions about the policy. I think it's firm but fair, and definitely happy to move it. With the one question, just is the time and effort put into the establishment of this policy considered qualifiable as a 77 expense for the municipality, as other COVID-related expenses are?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Deputy Mayor, I have not considered that. It might be something I clarify, but I can certainly consider that.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions?
No, I'd move the report, Mayor.
Okay, we got a mover and we got a seconder from Councillor Belch. Councillor Belch, did you have a comment?
I did have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor, just interested in hearing whether any employees have actually raised the point that they're not interested in having a COVID shot.
Through you, Mr. Mayor McFadden, to Councillor Belch. We haven't gone ahead and explored that question directly to any of our employees. There has been conversation, of course, in general, but until a policy is actually implemented, I would not be required to ask them the information required pertaining to their vaccine status until a policy is actually adopted.
Okay.
Very good. Any other questions? I've been known to weigh in on the odd issue, and this is not one of them. I would gladly see this moved and seconded by Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, record a vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you very much, Matthew and Yvette, for that report. I know a lot of time went into it, and I do personally thank you for your expertise on the topic. It's not an easy one, and thank you very much for writing up that policy.
Okay, thank you.
Next item is 9.4, report CAO report and capital status. Ms. Hurley?
The report is before council today for consideration. If you have any questions or anything that you would like to add over and above the direction that you've already passed today.
Okay, very good. We got Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, due to some recent discussion with the different constituents, I was going to ask that the staff come back to council with a review of the noise bylaw and report back at a future meeting and just add that action to the report status, the capital project report.
Very good. Sounds like a reasonable motion, and I got a seconder from Councillor Huntley.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's call for a vote on that. We can continue if there's any other questions, but Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Any other items on the outstanding or the report and capital project status? None. Motion then to receive that report. Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
and Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item is our verbal reports. Councillor Moore, we'll start with you.
There's none at this time, just the
None at this
library board
time?
meeting is tomorrow night.
Very good. Councillor Belch.
Nothing to report previously, but Thursday is the municipal revitalization meeting at 9 a.m. and Ganaraska meeting is on Thursday evening at 7:15.
Very good. Councillor Huntley.
Only that there's a bit of a ceremony for the unveiling of the kiosk at the mill this Friday at, I want to say 1 o'clock. With Orca kind of giving props to the Historical Society for the work they put into the kiosk that's there. So I'm sure if anybody wants to attend, they're more than welcome.
Excellent. Fantastic. Deputy Mayor Graham.
Nothing comprehensive to report. The one thing I would mention is that there is a work day planned for Millbrook Valley Trails on the Sunday. So if you are on the trails and you see some people hard at it, just sort of keep your distance and allow them to do the work, and don't be surprised. And yeah, should be fine.
Excellent. All right, motion to receive those verbal reports. Councillor Moore and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Sorry, I couldn't find my, am I unmuted? Yes, I am. I apologize for
I thought you were speechless, Clerk.
that. Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Motion is approved. There is no general business, no correspondence for information, no correspondence for action. Bylaws, being bylaw number 2021-60, being the procedural bylaw, be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Motion is approved. There's no unfinished business, no notices of motion. Confirming bylaw, being bylaw number 2021-61, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held October 18th, 2021, be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councillor Huntley and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Motion is approved. There's a couple upcoming events. Cabamonian Public Library Board meeting Tuesday, October 19th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. The Mr. Hack meeting Thursday, October 21st, 9 a.m. via Zoom. Millbrook Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting Monday, October 25th at 5 p.m. via Zoom. And in addition to that, there is a cannabis party or meeting or open house. Let's go with an open house. We've got a cannabis open house tonight at 5 p.m. And it is online and via Zoom. The information is on the township website if you wish to listen in. And with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Belch and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
and Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thanks, everybody.